The struggle for sustainable development nearly equals the struggle for political freedom. With these words, Nelson Mandela launched the final report of the World Commission on Dams to a global audience in November 2000. The report, entitled Dams and Development, a New Framework for Decision-Making, promised that if its recognition of rights and assessment of risks approach was followed, it would turn development conflict of the past into consensus for the future. Following its guidelines would ensure transparency, the equitable sharing of benefits with directly affected people, and ensure the environment was not ignored in a rush to build. Now, 10 years later, we revisit the promise of the World Commission on Dams and see what outcomes resulted from those who followed the Commission's roadmap and those who did not. The World Commission on Dams had come about as a result of growing protests around the world at the cumulative environmental impacts of large dams caused by massive disruption of the Earth's rivers and by the forced displacement of river-based communities around the world, as well as the huge impacts on downstream communities. To get an understanding of the scale of dam building, last century saw the equivalent of building one large dam per day, resulting in over 45,000 dams holding back our life-giving rivers. The WCD found many problems with big dams were caused by neglecting to include stakeholder interests and ecosystem values during the early stages of project planning, and a failure to look at all the options available for meeting water and energy needs before deciding to build a dam. Now, 10 years later, the WCD's recommendations are more important than ever. Climate change is worsening the situation, and the problems caused by large dams. With changing precipitation patterns and growing hydrological variability, large dam hydropower generation will be a riskier business. The safety of dams will be threatened, and the risks of social and environmental damages increased. The recent publication of the United Nations' third Global Biodiversity Outlook in May 2010 asserts that freshwater species are being lost at an alarming rate and that freshwater ecosystems are even more threatened than other ecosystems, and that there is extensive fragmentation of the world's rivers. Of the 292 large river systems in the world, 2/3 have been moderately or highly fragmented by dams and reservoirs. The human component of this river fragmentation is evident in a recent paper by Richter et al., which estimates that 8% of the world's population, of 472 million people, have been negatively affected downstream of large dams. Whilst no single dam built in the past decade embodies the WCD's approach from every angle, a number have followed key principles and resulted in better projects. Here are some of the WCD's key recommendations for protecting rivers and rights, and examples of how they have been put into practice. The Maguga Dam in Swaziland followed the World Commission on Dams guidelines with respect to the resettlement of dam-affected communities. The Maguga community were the first to receive benefits from the dam in the form of electricity and water for irrigation and household use, a precedent-setting situation that greatly reduced tension over resettlement and lost lands. The project staff said they could not have done it without the World Commission on Dams.
Yes, I'm very happy here.
Nepali engineers, economists and civil society chose to look for cheaper alternatives to big, costly foreign-led hydro projects, assessing their own options and needs rather than having others do it for them. Although their efforts were initially met with skepticism, it became clear that primarily locally financed, locally built, locally managed smaller projects could help meet Nepal's electricity needs in a more affordable way than a huge proposed dam. The WCD's guidelines for reparations for past impacts is making a difference in the case of the Chiksoy Dam in Guatemala. Nearly 30 years ago, over 450 Maya Achi Indians were massacred for refusing to relocate to inferior lands they were being offered. The Guatemalan government, together with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, have today nearly completed a long process of negotiations for reparations with survivors, who have been active participants every step of the way. The principle of free, prior and informed consent was successfully applied in the case of the Muscatum Dam in Canada, which was the first time where a company, Manitoba Hydro, entered into an equity partnership with the First Nations community, the Cree. This resulted in an improved dam design and the Cree Nation jointly owning the Wisconsin Generating Station. The World Commission on Dams recommendation regarding ensuring sufficient environment flows for downstream communities and the environment was successfully applied in a number of examples around the world, including the Itechi Dam on the Kafue River in Zambia, the Katse Dam in Lesotho, and the Berg River project in South Africa. These examples show that where the principles and guidelines of the World Commission on Dams have been applied, harm has been reduced and better decisions have resulted. But where the principles and guidelines have been ignored, we have seen the human rights violations, environmental degradation, and human conflict. The Merowe Dam in Sudan, where people have been resettled into the desert in inhumane conditions and protesters have been killed. The Gebe 3 Dam in Ethiopia, which, if completed, will destroy Lake Turkana as well as the livelihood of 500,000 agropastoralists. The Belo Monte Dam in Brazil, where the Brazilian government has just approved the building of the world's third largest hydroelectric dam on a tributary of the Amazon. The rights of indigenous communities have not been respected, and the government has yet to conduct a thorough options assessment. A cost-benefit analysis indicates the cost to be greater than the benefits the dam would bring. We can't create new water or build more rivers. We need to protect what we have. The best way to do that is to keep them as free-flowing and healthy as possible, and protect the people, plants and animals who depend on them. Which is why a cautious approach like the World Commission on Dams is the only one the planet can afford. 10 years later, the report of the World Commission on Dams is still our best roadmap.